Once upon a time, before Chelsea Football Club was even a thought, there was simply a patch of land in West London. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't famous, it wasn't even particularly well kept. It was just an open area near the River Thames where grass grew wild, and the only roars heard were from trains clattering down the nearby railway line. Yet even here, destiny was quietly waiting. This place would become Stamford Bridge, not the grand all-seater stadium we know today, but a modest ground with creaky stands, the smell of damp brickwork, and the sense that something bigger was coming. The funny thing? At first, Stamford Bridge wasn't even meant for Chelsea. In fact, there was no Chelsea. The year was 1904. A man named Gus Mears, a businessman with a big vision and, let's be honest, a bit of stubbornness, owned the ground. He loved football and wanted a team to play there. So he went to nearby Fulham FC and said, essentially, here's a stadium. Do you want it? Fulham said no. They already had their home. Most people would have given up. Gus Mears wasn't most people. Legend has it that while sitting in the Rising Sun pub, because of course this story starts in a pub, he decided, fine, if Fulham won't use my stadium, I'll just create my own club. And that's exactly what he did. And so on March 10th, 1905, Chelsea Football Club was born. Yes, technically created in a pub, which, if you know English football, makes perfect sense. If great empires can be founded on battlefields, then great football clubs can absolutely be founded between pints of ale.
Now you might think they'd just name the club after the stadium. Fulham Bridge, perhaps? Stamford Bridge FC? But no. Stamford Bridge sits in Chelsea, a district of London, and that name had a bit more sparkle. It rolled off the tongue better. It sounded fancy. So Chelsea FC it was. But here's the kicker. The stadium isn't technically in Chelsea. It's actually in Fulham, which means Chelsea FC has never actually played in Chelsea. This is one of those quirks that makes rival fans chuckle and Chelsea fans roll their eyes. Even back then, the club had a knack for irony. Every fairy tale needs costumes. Chelsea's first kit was Eton blue, chosen because the club's first president was the Earl of Cadogan, who just so happened to be an old Etonian. Yes, Chelsea began life dressed in the color of an elite private school. That's like starting your new band by wearing tuxedos. It looked fancy, but not very intimidating. Soon after, they switched to a deeper royal blue shirt, white shorts, and dark socks. That look stuck, and over time it evolved into the iconic all-blue kit we know today. But the very first Chelsea players looked a bit like they were off to afternoon tea instead of a football match. Chelsea needed a nickname. They found one in a nearby institution, the Royal Hospital Chelsea, home to retired soldiers known as the Chelsea Pensioners. The name was fitting, and the club adopted it proudly, the Pensioners. It sounded strong, respectable, full of tradition. The only problem? It didn't exactly scream fast, youthful football team. It was like calling your new sports car the old reliable tractor. Eventually, decades later, Chelsea would become the Blues. But for their early years, fans cheered on the Pensioners. Here's the wild thing. Chelsea were ambitious right out of the gate. Most new clubs start small, build slowly, maybe get noticed after a decade or two. Not Chelsea. They went big from day one. Within months of their founding, they joined the Football League in 1905. They even attracted star players like William Fatty Foulke, a goalkeeper famous not just for his size, over 20 stone, 130 kilograms, but also for his fiery temper. Fatty Foulke was said to be so large that children would run beside him on the street just to marvel at his frame. Once, after a game, angry at a referee's decision, he allegedly picked the poor referee up and dangled him above the ground. Imagine being the official in that situation. Yellow card? Red card? Actually, I resign. Fatty became Chelsea's first captain, and whether for his saves or his sheer presence, he made Chelsea unforgettable. It wasn't just the players. Chelsea also drew massive crowds almost immediately. In fact, their first few decades were defined less by trophies and more by attendances. Stamford Bridge could hold tens of thousands, and people came in droves. In 1935, a staggering 82,905 fans crammed into the bridge to watch Chelsea play Arsenal. To this day, it remains the highest attendance ever recorded at an English League game. That's right, not Manchester United, not Liverpool, but Chelsea, the club still finding its feet. Chelsea were already box office. The trophies would take time, but the crowds were hooked. For decades, Chelsea had the reputation of being flashy but inconsistent. They'd sign big names, excite the fans, but fall short on the pitch. They were known as entertainers more than winners. That all changed in 1955. Manager Ted Drake came in and stripped away the old-fashioned image. Out went the pensioners' nickname. In came a new focus on fitness and youth. And in that magical year, Chelsea won their first ever league title. It shocked English football. Chelsea, the club of glamour but little substance, had finally proven they could go all the way. The funny part? Just a year later, they were invited to join the brand new European Cup, the tournament that would eventually become the Champions League. But the English FA thought it was a silly foreign distraction and made Chelsea withdraw. Yes, Chelsea could have been part of the very first European Cup. Instead, they had to wait half a century for their shot at European glory. Typical Chelsea luck. And so, Chelsea's early story was one of contrasts. They were glamorous but often underachieving. They had huge crowds but few trophies. They were based in Fulham but named after Chelsea. They dressed like schoolboys but fought like soldiers. It was messy, it was chaotic, it was eccentric. But it was also the beginning of something magical. Because even in those early decades, Chelsea had carved out a reputation. The club of excitement, the club of style, the club that could fill a stadium even if the silverware cabinet stayed empty. And, as every bedtime story reminds us, the best adventures are the ones where the heroes stumble, fall, and get back up again. Chelsea's greatest nights were still decades away, but the seeds were planted right there back in 1905 in a pub near Stamford Bridge.
As the years rolled on, Chelsea would change faces again and again. They'd become kings of the King's Road in the swinging 60s. They'd sink into darkness in the 1980s. And they'd rise again with billionaires and Champions League triumphs. But it all began here, with a stubborn man in a pub, a giant goalkeeper, and a stadium filled with dreams. The pensioners were awake. The blues were being born. And the fairy tale of Chelsea FC had only just begun. If you walked down King's Road in the mid-60s, you'd see it all. Mods in sharp suits, rock stars in sunglasses, models with their hair piled high, and the faint scent of rebellion in the air. This was the epicenter of cool, the heartbeat of swinging London. And right there, soaking up the atmosphere, was Chelsea Football Club. Suddenly, Stamford Bridge wasn't just a place to watch football, it was a place to be seen. Actors, musicians, even royalty turned up. Supporting Chelsea became a fashion statement. Forget silverware, Chelsea now had glamour. It was almost as if the club had looked at its awkward pensioners' past and thought, no thanks. We'd like to be trendy now. Every good story needs a bold character, and Chelsea found one in Tommy Docherty, a Scottish manager with a sharp tongue. and even sharper ideas. He arrived in the early 1960s and decided Chelsea needed fresh blood. So he cleared out the older players and brought in a wave of youngsters. They called them Doherty's Diamonds. Some were rough, some sparkled, but together they gave Chelsea energy and swagger. Imagine a school field trip where half the class has decided they're in the Beatles. That was Chelsea in the mid-60s. Players like Peter Osgood, Ron Harris, and Charlie Cook became the faces of this new Chelsea. Osgood, in particular, was the star. Tall, elegant, and stylish both on and off the pitch. He wasn't just a footballer. He was a celebrity. People called him the King of Stamford Bridge. If Chelsea was Hollywood, Osgood was the leading man. But for every leading man, you need a tough sidekick. Enter Ron Chopper Harris. His nickname tells you everything you need to know. Harris wasn't about elegance. He was about stopping opponents, usually with a crunching tackle. In fact, Chopper Harris became so feared that opposing forwards often joked they'd rather face a wild bear than face him at full speed. The thing was, Ron wasn't malicious. He just believed football was, at its heart, a contact sport. If you wanted to dribble past him, fine. Just be prepared to limp afterwards, and fans loved him for it. Every fairy tale needs a knight with a big sword, and Chopper Harris was Chelsea's. All of this glamour and grit finally paid off in 1970 when Chelsea reached the FA Cup final against Leeds United. And oh, what a final it was. Leeds were the villains of English football at the time. Brilliant, yes, but also rough, cynical, and hated by just about everyone else. Chelsea, meanwhile, were the flashy underdogs with long hair and flair. The final became a clash of cultures, hard men from the north versus stylish lads from London. The first match at Wembley ended in a brutal 2-2 draw. And when I say brutal, I mean it. By today's standards, half the players would have been sent off within 20 minutes. The tackles were more like wrestling moves. One journalist called it the most violent match ever seen at Wembley. Because there were no penalty shootouts back then, the game went to a replay at Old Trafford. This time, Chelsea triumphed. Osgood scored, of course, and Dave Webb got the winner in extra time. Chelsea had won their first ever FA Cup, and in doing so, cemented their reputation as a team of both beauty and bite. Because there were no penalty shootouts back then, the game went to a replay at Old Trafford. This time, Chelsea triumphed. Osgood scored, of course, and Dave Webb got the winner in extra time. Chelsea had won their first ever FA Cup, and in doing so, cemented their reputation as a team of both beauty and bite. As if that wasn't enough, Chelsea carried their momentum into Europe. In 1971, they won the European Cup Winners' Cup, beating the mighty Real Madrid in a replay. Think about that. Little old Chelsea, who just decades earlier had been laughed at for being more flash than substance, were now lifting a European trophy. And it wasn't a fluke. They had flair, they had toughness, and they had fans who adored them. The club was on top of the world. But fairy tales always have a twist, don't they? For Chelsea, the 1970s were a roller coaster. The success of 1970 and 1971 raised expectations sky high, but financial problems soon began to bite. The club attempted to rebuild Stamford Bridge into a modern 60,000-seater stadium. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious. Costs spiraled out of control. On the pitch, the team aged, stars left, and results dipped. By the mid-70s, Chelsea were relegated. One of the saddest chapters was the departure of Peter Osgood. Disputes with the manager led to him being sold, and For many fans, it felt like losing the heart of the club. Osgood was Chelsea. He embodied the swagger, the coolness, the style. Without him, Chelsea felt different. And yet, the bond between Osgood and the fans never truly broke. Years later, when he passed away in 2006, his ashes were buried under the Stamford Bridge penalty spot. Even now, Chelsea supporters sing his name. By the end of the 1970s, Chelsea had gone from the coolest club in London to a team battling financial ruin, relegation, and crumbling stands. The King's Road days were gone, replaced by worry and uncertainty. But that's what makes Chelsea's story so fascinating. They weren't just winners or losers, they were both, often in quick succession. One year, they were the darlings of English football. The next, they were fighting to stay alive. It was chaotic. It was frustrating. But it was never, ever boring. And so, as the 1970s closed, Chelsea stood at a crossroads. They had tasted glamour. They had lifted trophies. They had even conquered Europe. But they had also stumbled into financial disaster, relegation, and instability. The road ahead would be rocky, very rocky. But it would also set the stage for some of the most dramatic chapters in football history. Because if Chelsea in the 1960s were the club of style, and Chelsea in the 1970s were the club of contradictions, then Chelsea in the 1980s were about to become the club of survival. And that, dear listener, is where our story will drift next. By the time the 1980s dawned, Chelsea had already lived a lifetime of highs and lows. They'd been London's fashionable darlings, European conquerors, and then almost overnight, they'd become a club staring into the abyss. The bridge was crumbling, the squad was fractured, and lurking in the stands, a new problem was growing. One that had little to do with football, but everything to do with survival. Chelsea's troubles began with a dream. The club had wanted a modern stadium, a monument to their rising status. But instead of a shining jewel, they ended up with, well, a construction site. The redevelopment of Stamford Bridge was supposed to be bold, new stands, a bigger capacity, a home fit for champions. But spiraling costs left the club broke. By the late 70s, Chelsea were drowning in debt. To make matters worse, the stadium itself felt like a metaphor for the club. Half-finished, messy, and falling apart, piles of rubble surrounded the ground. Some fans joked it looked less like a football arena and more like a set for a post-apocalyptic movie. And yet, the crowd still came. Because if there's one thing Chelsea fans know how to do, it's stick with their team through thick and thin. But not everyone who came to Stamford Bridge was there for football. The 1980s were the dark days of English hooliganism, and Chelsea gained one of the fiercest reputations of them all. The Chelsea Head Hunters, an infamous firm of hooligans, became feared across the country. They weren't just loud. They were violent, organized, and relentless. Rival fans dreaded trips to Stamford Bridge not because of the team, but because of the terraces. It was ugly, dangerous, and it nearly destroyed the club's reputation. Families stayed away. Sponsors hesitated. Politicians called Chelsea a problem club. Instead of being known for stylish football, Chelsea became synonymous with riots and police lines. On the pitch, things weren't much better. In 1979, Chelsea were relegated to the second division. It was humiliating, especially for a club that had recently beaten Real Madrid. The second division was a different world. Smaller grounds, rougher pitches, fewer cameras. For Chelsea, it felt like exile. They weren't the glamorous club of the King's Road anymore. They were just another struggling side, scrapping to survive. And worse, they weren't even good at scrapping. In 1982, Chelsea almost fell into the third division. Imagine it. Chelsea, the club of Osgood and Harris, the club of FA Cups and European nights, nearly playing against teams they once wouldn't have noticed on the fixture list. It was the lowest point in their history.
And then, almost out of nowhere, hope arrived. His name was John Neal, a quiet, unassuming manager who took charge in 1981. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't a headline grabber, but he was exactly what Chelsea needed. Calm, steady, and smart. Neal rebuilt the squad on a shoestring budget, signing players who weren't superstars but who fit together like puzzle pieces. One by one, he assembled a side that could fight, run, and score. By 1983-84, Chelsea had been transformed. They stormed the second division, finishing top, and returned to the first division with a sense of rebirth. Fans who had been clinging on through years of misery suddenly felt proud again. Every fairy tale comeback needs a hero, and Chelsea's was Kerry Dixon. Signed from Reading in 1983, Dixon became an instant legend. Tall, quick, and lethal in front of goal, he scored 34 goals in his first season. Fans adored him. He wasn't just a striker, he was a lifeline. Dixon dragged Chelsea back into relevance, and his goals gave the club something they'd been missing for years: belief. Some even said Dixon was the spiritual successor to Peter Osgood. He wasn't as flashy off the pitch, but on it, he had the same knack for scoring when it mattered most.
But Dixon wasn't alone.
Another key figure was Pat Nevin, a Scottish winger who was as unpredictable as he was brilliant. Nevin wasn't like other footballers of the 80s. While many players spent their evenings in pubs, Nevin spent his in art galleries and record shops. He loved indie music, read books, and had a quirky sense of humor. He was, in short, a footballer who felt more like an art student. Fans loved him for it. Nevin represented the quirky alternative side of Chelsea. He wasn't a warrior like Chopper Harris, and he wasn't a superstar like Osgood. He was something different, a reminder that football could still have personality in a decade often dominated by grim seriousness. With Dixon scoring and Nevin dazzling, Chelsea returned to the first division in 1984. And this time, they weren't just there to make up the numbers. In the mid-'80s, Chelsea were exciting again. They finished 6th in the league in 1984-85, their best performance in over a decade. Stamford Bridge felt alive, even if the stand still looked half-built. For a brief moment, the club looked like it might finally escape its cycle of chaos. But Chelsea's curse is that just when things look good, something goes wrong. By the late 80s, financial problems resurfaced. The ownership of Stamford Bridge became tangled in legal battles, with property developers threatening to take the ground away. Think about that. Chelsea almost lost Stamford Bridge. Without it, the club might not have survived at all. At the same time, hooliganism hadn't gone away. The reputation of the headhunters still hung over the club. For every headline about Dixon's goals, there was another about riots in the terraces. By 1988, Chelsea were relegated again. The hope of the mid-'80s had turned sour.
But Chelsea refused to die. In 1989, they bounced straight back to the first division, winning the second division title under Bobby Campbell. It was the perfect metaphor for the decade: fall down, get back up, stumble, recover. Chelsea were survivors. And so, as the 1980s closed, Chelsea were still alive. Battered, bruised, but alive. They had stared into the abyss, nearly dropped into the third division, nearly lost their stadium, and nearly collapsed under the weight of hooliganism. But they hadn't. Somehow, through grit, luck, and a few moments of brilliance, Chelsea made it into the 1990s intact. The 1990s didn't just feel like a new decade for Chelsea, they felt like a rebirth. After years of financial chaos, crumbling stadium stands, and brushes with disaster, the club was finally ready to dream again. But like all good bedtime stories, the beginning of this chapter starts quietly, almost cautiously. At first, no one could have guessed that the Chelsea of the 90s would lay the foundation for the global powerhouse we know today. The first change was simple but monumental. Stamford Bridge was finally secured. After years of fighting off property developers, Chelsea's owners managed to keep the ground. It's hard to overstate this. If the club had lost Stamford Bridge, they might have lost their identity. Imagine Chelsea playing home games in, say, Shepherd's Bush or Milton Keynes. It just wouldn't be Chelsea. But with the stadium safe, the board could finally look to the future, and that future started to look a lot brighter. In 1993, Chelsea made a bold move by appointing Glenn Hoddle as player manager. Now, Hoddle wasn't just any player. He was one of the most gifted English footballers of his generation, a man who passed the ball like it was tied to a string. Smooth, elegant, and thoughtful, he represented a different kind of football, and that's exactly what Chelsea needed. Hoddle brought with him a continental style. He wanted Chelsea to play with intelligence, with flair, with something more than brute force. And suddenly, Stamford Bridge, long seen as a fortress of rough-and-tumble football, began to look cosmopolitan. Hoddle's biggest impact wasn't just on tactics, it was on recruitment. Under his watch, Chelsea began to attract international stars. In 1995, Chelsea shocked English football by signing Ruud Gullit. Yes, that Gullit, the Dutch legend with dreadlocks flowing like a lion's mane, a Ballon d'Or winner, and a man who had conquered Europe with AC Milan. For Chelsea fans who had endured years of mediocrity, seeing Gullit in blue felt surreal. It was like waking up from a nightmare and realizing you'd been invited to dinner with royalty. But Gullit wasn't the only one. Soon, Chelsea were bringing in players like Gianluca Vialli, a Champions League winner with Juventus, and Gianfranco Zola, the magician from Sardinia, who would soon be adored like a saint in West London. In a league that was just beginning to embrace foreign talent, Chelsea were suddenly at the forefront. When Hoddle left in 1996 to manage England, Chelsea handed the reins to Gullit. And let's be honest, if you're going to have a player manager, who better than Ruud Gullit? He was cool, he was charismatic, and he was a natural leader. Under Gullit, Chelsea didn't just play football, they played it with swagger. And in 1997, it paid off. Chelsea lifted the FA Cup, their first major trophy since 1971. For fans who had grown up on stories of Osgood and Harris, this was the moment they had been waiting decades for. The celebrations were wild. London felt blue again. And the best part? This was only the beginning. If Gullit brought trophies, it was Gianfranco Zola who brought magic. Signed in 1996, Zola quickly became the heart of Chelsea. He was tiny, barely 5'6", but he played like a giant, with a low center of gravity, dazzling dribbles, and a smile that melted defenses as easily as it melted fans' hearts. Zola was irresistible. Commentators called him a magician. Fans called him a genius. Kids in West London started trying back heels and flicks in the park, pretending they were Zola. And the thing about Zola, he wasn't just brilliant, he was kind. He respected the club, adored the fans, and never let stardom go to his head. To this day, Chelsea fans still speak about him with revere. The late 90s became a golden period. Under Gullit and then under Gianluca Vialli, Chelsea collected silverware like souvenirs. 1997 FA Cup, 1998 League Cup, 1998 Cup Winners' Cup, 1998 Super Cup. For a club that had nearly been relegated to the third division a decade earlier, this was like winning the lottery 4 times in a row. Chelsea weren't just survivors anymore. They were winners. Meanwhile, back home, the Premier League was growing into a global phenomenon. Manchester United dominated, Arsenal were resurgent under Arsene Wenger, and Liverpool were always looming. But Chelsea? They were now part of the conversation. No longer the punchline, no longer the nearly men. Chelsea had swagger. They had stars. They had Zola. For kids growing up in the 90s, Chelsea was suddenly cool again. Not just for their trophies, but for their flair. They were the stylish alternative to Manchester United's machine-like dominance. London sleeps light. Even at midnight, there's a hush and hum to it. Taxis like fireflies, rain rehearsing on windowsills, the Thames deciding which way to sigh. Down in Fulham, Stamford Bridge glows a quiet blue, as if someone left a nightlight on for the Lion. And then, one summer evening, a new character steps into the story, not with trumpets, with a pen, a signature, and the doors swing open. He is wealthy in the way bedtime stories usually reserve for dragons guarding gold. But there's no growl, just curiosity. Roman Abramovich takes a seat at the table in 2003 and says very gently, "What if Chelsea did not have to dream in rationed portions anymore?" The club exhales, the cupboards are stocked, the lights come back on. Claudio Ranieri, the tinkerman with kind eyes and a pocket full of lineups, is already there, smiling like a school teacher who's been given a brand new set of colored chalks. And suddenly, the shopping list gets playful. A winger who runs like a kite in a gale. Arjen Robben welcome, goalkeeper with hands like library doors. Peter Cech this way, a forward who makes defenders feel like they forgot their homework. Didier Drogba, please sign here. Whispers ripple through England. Chelsea are serious. Chelsea, smiling politely, reply, "We know. Shopping while hungry is dangerous. Shopping while newly rich, that's how you come home with a spine, a heartbeat, and a roar." Every good tale has a ring to it, a repeating sound that says, yes, you're in the right story. For Chelsea, it becomes the click of Frank Lampard's right foot, metronome and thunder, and the thud of John Terry's forehead, captain as compass. Between them sits Claude Makelele, quiet as a library, vacuuming up chaos so the rest can write poetry. If football had job titles on little badges, his would simply read, "No, not today." Behind them, Peter Cech stands tall, helmet gleaming under floodlights like a knight who swapped a horse for a 6-yard box. Out wide, Joe Cole doodles in the margins. Down the touchline, Arjen Robben and Damien Duff fold the pitch into paper airplanes and send them sailing behind fullbacks. The ball begins to sound different, firmer, happier. He arrives with a grin that says he's already read the last page and knows how it ends. Jose Mourinho. He says he is special, and in the strange etiquette of football, it somehow works. Not because the boast is loud, but because it fits like a key. The training ground gets tidier, the sentences shorter, the purpose heavier. Chelsea begin to defend like a family guarding a secret and attack like a sudden memory of summer. A season becomes a statement. 95 points. Only 15 goals conceded. Stamford Bridge feels spellbound. There's a moment, game after game, when the crowd exhales and realizes we are safe here. You can almost hear the stadium purr, whispered aside. If anyone asks why the goals conceded were so few, just shrug and say, we had Czech, Carvalho, Terry, and a manager who ironed the calendar. A counterattack that looks like a blue silk ribbon stretched from one box to the other. A 1-0 that feels like a novel with no wasted words. A dugout glance from Jose that says, we discussed this on Tuesday. Didier Drogba lifting center backs the way some people lift furniture, carefully, but with intent. And the songs start to stick. We've got Super Frank Lampard. Floats down Fulham Road like steam from tea. Chelsea do not just win the league, they keep it. 2004 to 2005, 2005 to 2006. Back to back, like bookends. The medals clink softly, and the city learns a new lullaby. Champions sleep well. On some nights, Jose calls it parking the bus when others defend too much. Chelsea fans, smiling, later realize they've been parking a double-decker with leather seats and mood lighting. In a whispered tale told by kitmen and giggling journalists, Jose once finds a creative way to speak to his players while banned. Whether it involved a laundry basket is not for us to say at bedtime, only that the shirts came out very well organized. But stories do not earn happy endings. They arrive at them, late and muddy. In 2008, Chelsea reached their first Champions League final, a red and blue chess match in Moscow. The rain hangs in the air, undecided. Penalties arrive, decided. A captain takes his steps. There is a slip, not life, not destiny, just a slip. The post shudders. The night tilts. For a heartbeat, the whole club stands in a doorway between what ifs and what next. And then, the part that matters, they walk on. Because Chelsea's trick is not that they never fall. It's that they carry a small, stubborn ladder everywhere they go. Managers switch in and out like stage hands in black. Avram Grant nearly touches the stars. Luis Felipe Scolari brings a World Cup aura that doesn't fit the room. Gus Hiddink is the kindly substitute teacher who keeps everyone calm during a fire drill. For a while, the steam softens. Carlo Ancelotti arrives with the expression of a man who's already fed a large family and is ready to feed one more. His football is pasta done properly. Simple, generous, satisfying. In 2010, Chelsea score goals like they're testing the scoreboard's stamina. The double arrives, League and FA Cup, slipped onto the club's finger with a smile. Gentle tease. Some teams announce themselves with manifestos. Carlo just hands you a plate and you realize you're full and happy and not sure when it happened. But the calendar is impatient. Carlo departs. The room cools. The story needs a storm. May 19th, 2012. The Allianz Arena is red and loud and very much Bavaria. It is also, inconveniently, where the final is being held. Chelsea arrived like travelers with too few bags and too many reasons. Suspensions, injuries. A caretaker manager with sleeves rolled up. Roberto Di Matteo, a former Blue, now the calm at the center. The game plays like a held breath. Bayern Munich piled chance upon chance, as if trying to build a door in the side of fate. With 7 minutes left, the door swings. Thomas Muller scores. The stadium shakes itself comfortable. People begin to rehearse the sentence, Bayern, champions of Europe, and then, Chelsea's favorite magic trick, the no, actually. A corner, late as a bus in the rain. The cross hisses. Didier Drogba lifts, hangs and gently headbutts the story into a different shape. The net ripples like a curtain. The scoreboard blinks awake. A drum somewhere in West London picks up a beat. Extra time arrives. Moody, Arjen Robben, wins a penalty for Bayern. Ah, the old friend in the wrong shirt. He steps up. Petr Cech reads him like a childhood book and saves, twice counting the rebound. The night refuses to choose a winner. Penalties then. The odd little courtroom where football sends its unfinished business. Chelsea's kicks feel like postcards from every heartache that came before. Juan Mata misses. The past clears its throat. But David Luiz grins something fearless. Frank Lampard writes his usual line. Ashley Cole kisses the post on the way by, polite as ever. And there he is. Drogba again. The man who collects finals like sea glass. He has scored to tie. Now he can score to end. He looks calm in that peculiar way great strikers do. Not empty, but ready. A blink, a run, a pass into the corner of history. Chelsea are champions of Europe, the first London side to hold that cup, against the odds at midnight, in someone else's house, somewhere in the quiet. You can hear the 2008 rain make peace with itself. It falls at last, but this time it sounds like applause. They don't say I told you so. They say we kept going. Drogba walks away to new adventures with the dignity of a knight sheathing a sword. The last touch of the ball in his first spell as a Blue is the touch that crowns the tale. Later he will come back, because that is how circles work. Di Matteo smiles like a man who found a key under a doormat and opened a locked house. The city sleeps deeper that night. The club's badge feels heavier on the shirt in the best possible way. The morning after Munich was unlike anything Chelsea had ever known. Fans woke up with hoarse voices. Parades filled the streets. And for once, the headlines weren't about money or managerial drama. They were about glory. The club had climbed Everest, and on the summit, they planted a blue flag. Yet, as any mountaineer will tell you, the hardest part often comes after the peak, the descent. For Chelsea, that descent began almost immediately. Roberto Di Matteo, the beloved caretaker who guided the club to the Champions League, was given the permanent job. It was a fairy tale ending to a fairy tale run. But football, unlike bedtime stories, doesn't always let the heroes live happily ever after. The new season started with optimism, but reality came like a cold London rain. In the Champions League, the very competition they had fought tooth and nail to win, Chelsea stumbled badly. Group stage elimination, the earliest ever for a defending champion. Suddenly, the magic dust was gone. The board acted in a way Chelsea fans knew all too well. Di Matteo was out. The man who brought them their greatest night was shown the door before Christmas, and in walked Rafa Benitez, interim manager. Temporary solution. Caretaker of the caretaker. Pick your label, Chelsea fans weren't thrilled. After all, Rafa had been the manager of Liverpool during those fiery duels in the mid-2000s. He had been the enemy. Stamford Bridge didn't exactly give him a warm welcome. Some supporters booed his name before his first match. Imagine being invited to someone's house for dinner only to have the entire family scowl when you walk through the door. That was Rafa's start at Chelsea. Yet football, like life, has a funny way of twisting stories. The fans never embraced him, but the team kept grinding. And in May 2013, Chelsea lifted the Europa League. Branislav Ivanovic, the tough-as-nails Serbian, headed in the winter against Benfica in Amsterdam. The trophy was theirs. Here's the twist. For a brief moment in time, Chelsea were the reigning champions of both Europe's major club competitions. They held the Champions League title from 2012 and the Europa League in 2013. No other club had done that before. The irony? The banners would hang forever, but the manager who delivered that slice of history would slip quietly out the back door once his interim role ended. Benitez left, trophy in hand, never truly accepted but never forgotten either. And then came the return. The sequel fans had been waiting for. Jose Mourinho, the special one, who had first turned Chelsea into a modern superpower, was back in 2013. Only this time, he wasn't calling himself special. He walked into the press room at Stamford Bridge and smiled. "I'm the happy one," he declared, a little older, a little calmer. Or at least, that was the promise. Chelsea had their talisman back, but this wasn't 2004 anymore. The squad had changed, the Premier League had evolved, and Mourinho needed new soldiers. Enter Eden Hazard, the dazzling Belgian signed the year before. With his quick feet, low center of gravity, and ability to make defenders look like traffic cones, Hazard became a face of Chelsea's new era. Alongside him were Oscar, Mata, briefly, and later, Diego Costa, a striker who played football like it was a street fight. Chelsea also had Thibaut Courtois, the towering goalkeeper returning from loan, ready to take over from club legend Peter Cech. The 2013-14 season was a dress rehearsal. There were flashes of brilliance, like the famous win at Anfield, where a slip, quite literally Gerrard's slip, helped Chelsea derail Liverpool's title dream. But Mourinho insisted they weren't ready yet. He called his team little horses, not big enough to drink from the title challenger trough, a metaphor only Mourinho could get away with. By 2014-15, the little horse had grown into a thoroughbred. Chelsea stormed the league, playing pragmatic but ruthless football. Hazard was unplayable, gliding past defenders and racking up goals. Costa bullied center backs like a schoolyard kid who stole everyone's lunch. Cesc Fabregas, signed from Barcelona, pulled the strings in midfield with passes so precise they felt like GPS coordinates. And at the back, John Terry rolled back the years, marshalling the defense like the captain he always was. The following season, Chelsea collapsed so dramatically that it felt less like a football campaign and more like a Shakespearean tragedy. By Christmas, the champions were hovering just above the relegation zone. Yes, relegation. The same players who had looked untouchable the year before now looked like they'd forgotten what sport they were playing. The dressing room was in turmoil. Rumors swirled of player mutinies, training ground bust-ups, and an infamous, palpable discord that Jose Mourinho mentioned with the kind of bitterness only he could deliver. By December 2015, the unthinkable happened. Mourinho was sacked, again. Stamford Bridge had lost its special one for the second time. It was messy. It was chaotic. And for Chelsea fans, it was exhausting. But if there's one thing about this club, it's that drama is always followed by silverware. In 2016, a new man arrived. Antonio Conte, the fiery Italian with a voice that could rattle windows and a passion that made even the most casual fan sit up straight. If Mourinho was a chess master, Conte was a general leading his troops into battle. He paced the touchline like a man possessed, gesturing wildly, shouting instructions, and occasionally celebrating goals as if he'd just won the lottery. Conte didn't just rebuild Chelsea, he reinvented them. His big tactical switch, a 3-4-3 formation, shocked the league. Wingbacks flying forward, Hazard and Costa unleashed in attack, and N'Golo Kanté, the quiet Frenchman who seemed to have cloned himself to cover the entire pitch, running the show. The result? Chelsea stormed to the 2016-17 Premier League title, racking up a then-record 30 wins in a season. It wasn't just dominance. It was a statement. Conte's Chelsea were ruthless, organized, and efficient, and Stamford Bridge was bouncing again. If Conte was the general, Hazard was the magician. Throughout these years, Hazard carried Chelsea on his shoulders. With his low center of gravity, quick dribbles, and mischievous smile, He had defenders tied in knots. But as with many Chelsea managers, the fire eventually burned too hot. By his second season, tension grew between Conte and the board over transfers. He wanted soldiers. The club gave him compromises. The passion that had once electrified the squad started to wear them down. By 2018, the title-winning magic was gone. Conte was out. It was another reminder of Chelsea's peculiar rhythm: success, conflict, departure. Over and over again. In came Maurizio Sarri, another Italian, but of a very different style. Where Conte barked and raged, Sarri chain-smoked and spoke softly of philosophy. He brought Sarri ball, a possession-based style designed to suffocate opponents with endless passing triangles. It wasn't always pretty. In fact, at times it was painfully slow, like watching someone try to download a movie with dial-up internet. But when it clicked, it worked. Jorginho, Sarri's loyal midfielder, became the metronome. Conte adjusted to a new role. The highlight came in 2019, the Europa League final in Baku, Azerbaijan. Chelsea faced Arsenal, their London rivals, and produced one of their most complete performances in years. Hazard, knowing it would be his last game in blue before joining Real Madrid, stole the show. Chelsea won 4-1, lifting yet another European trophy. It was the perfect farewell for their talisman. Hazard left as a legend, a player who had carried Chelsea through storm after storm. By the summer of 2019, Chelsea had lived through 4 managers in as many years, won 2 Premier League titles, an FA Cup, and 2 Europa Leagues. It was chaotic, unpredictable, and at times exhausting, but it was also uniquely Chelsea. This was a club that thrived on reinvention, that stumbled and soared in equal measure, and that never, ever stood still. And as the 2010 second drew to a close, a new chapter was waiting. A chapter defined not by expensive stars or fiery managers, but by something Chelsea hadn't truly embraced in decades: their own youth. Every great story has a full circle moment. And for Chelsea, 2019 delivered one of the most emotional. With Hazard gone, a transfer ban in place, and Sarri off to Juventus, the club looked like it was walking into a storm with no umbrella. The board needed a leader who could steady the ship. And so, they turned to a familiar face: Frank Lampard. Lampard wasn't just a former player. He was the player. Chelsea's record goal scorer, the man who had led by example during the club's golden era. For fans, it was like seeing the prodigal son return home, except this time he wasn't wearing shin pads, he was wearing a suit. Because of a FIFA transfer ban, Lampard couldn't splash money on shiny new signings. At most clubs, that would have been a disaster. At Chelsea, it turned into an opportunity. For years, the club's youth academy had been winning trophies, producing talent, and quietly supplying half of England's youth teams. But very few graduates ever broke into the Chelsea first team. Now, they had no choice. Suddenly, the likes of Mason Mount, Tammy Abraham, Fikayo Tomori, and Reece James weren't just prospects. They were starters. And under Lampard, they flourished. The team played with freedom, hunger, and fearlessness. Stamford Bridge buzzed with something it hadn't felt in years: a sense of homegrown pride. Yes, results were inconsistent, and yes, Lampard was learning on the job. But finishing in the top 4 with a team of kids and cast-offs was nothing short of remarkable. Of course, this is Chelsea. Sentiment only lasts so long. By the middle of Lampard's second season, cracks began to show. Despite big money arrivals like Kai Havertz, Timo Werner, and Hakim Ziyech, Results dipped. Performances grew patchy. The youthful energy of his first year had given way to tactical confusion. And in January 2021, the inevitable happened. Lampard was sacked. It was brutal. It was cold. And it was classic Chelsea. The fans mourned. Some said it was too soon. Others feared the magic of the youth movement would vanish. But Roman Abramovich, ever the pragmatist, had already lined up a replacement. Enter Thomas Tuchel, the German tactician who had just been let go by Paris Saint-Germain. Where Lampard relied on heart, Tuchel brought calculation. He immediately tightened the defense, installed a precise 3-4-3 system, and turned Chelsea into a fortress. Players who had looked lost under Lampard suddenly became world beaters. Antonio Rudiger transformed into a warrior at the back. Jorginho became the conductor in midfield. And N'Golo Kanté, already a fan favorite, reached superhuman levels, covering every blade of grass as if powered by invisible batteries. The turnaround was astonishing. In just a few months, Chelsea went from drifting mid-table to challenging on all fronts. The climax came in the 2021 Champions League. Chelsea's path wasn't easy. They faced Atletico Madrid, Real Madrid, and finally, Manchester City, Pep Guardiola's juggernaut. The team everyone expected to win, but Chelsea were relentless. Tuchel's tactics suffocated opponents. The defense stood like a wall, and the attack struck at just the right moments. The final in Porto was the ultimate showdown. David versus Goliath, with billions watching. And in the 42nd minute, Kai Havertz, the expensive signing who had struggled all season, latched onto a pass from Mason Mount, rounded the keeper, and slid the ball into the net. One goal, one moment, one dream realized. Chelsea were European champions again. Of course, this is Chelsea. Sentiment only lasts so long. By the middle of Lampard's second season, cracks began to show. Despite big money arrivals like Kai Havertz, Timo Werner, and Hakim Ziyech, results dipped. Performances grew patchy. The youthful energy of his first year had given way to tactical confusion. And in January 2021, the inevitable happened. Lampard was sacked. It was brutal. It was cold. And it was classic Chelsea. The fans mourned. Some said it was too soon. Others feared the magic of the youth movement would vanish. But Roman Abramovich, ever the pragmatist, had already lined up a replacement. Enter Thomas Tuchel, the German tactician who had just been let go by Paris Saint-Germain. Where Lampard relied on heart, Tuchel brought calculation. He immediately tightened the defense, installed a precise 3-4-3 system, and turned Chelsea into a fortress. Players who had looked lost under Lampard suddenly became world beaters. Antonio Rudiger transformed into a warrior at the back. Jorginho became the conductor in midfield. And N'Golo Kanté, already a fan favorite, reached superhuman levels, covering every blade of grass as if powered by invisible batteries. The turnaround was astonishing. In just a few months, Chelsea went from drifting mid-table to challenging on all fronts. The climax came in the 2021 Champions League. Chelsea's path wasn't easy. They faced Atletico Madrid, Real Madrid, and finally, Manchester City, Pep Guardiola's juggernaut. The team everyone expected to win, but Chelsea were relentless. Tuchel's tactics suffocated opponents. The defense stood like a wall, and the attack struck at just the right moments. The final in Porto was the ultimate showdown. David versus Goliath, with billions watching. And in the 42nd minute, Kai Havertz, the expensive signing who had struggled all season, latched onto a pass from Mason Mount, rounded the keeper, and slid the ball into the net. One goal, one moment, one dream realized. Chelsea were European champions again. The scenes were unforgettable. Kante lifted the trophy with his shy smile, practically glowing with humility. Tuchel jumped around like a man who'd just discovered coffee for the first time, and Mason Mount, the academy boy, stood there as proof that Chelsea's future could be built on its own foundations. From the heartbreak of losing Hazard, to the hope of Lampard's return, to the brilliance of Tuchel's Champions League triumph, Chelsea had once again proven what they always do. They may stumble, they may sack, they may rebuild, but in the end, they rise. It wasn't just a victory for the players or the manager. It was a victory for the fans who had lived through the chaos, for the academy that had waited years to be trusted, and for a club whose greatest strength is its ability to turn turmoil into triumph. And with that, Chelsea entered the 2022 not just as champions, but as survivors. Winning the Champions League in 2021 should have been the start of another golden era for Chelsea. After all, the team was young, the squad was deep, and Tuchel looked like the kind of manager who could lead the club into the future. But, as history has taught us, nothing at Chelsea ever stays simple for long. The summer of 2021 brought with it one of the most dramatic transfer sagas in Chelsea's modern history. The club needed a striker, someone to finish the endless chances being created by Mount, Havertz, and the rest. And so, the prodigal son returned, Romelu Lukaku. 10 years earlier, Lukaku had arrived at Stamford Bridge as a teenager, raw and eager, but never given a proper chance. He left, built his career elsewhere, and by 2021, he was one of Europe's most feared forwards, fresh off a title-winning season with Inter Milan. Chelsea splashed nearly £100 million to bring him back, imagining him as the final piece of the puzzle. For a few weeks, it looked like a fairy tale. Lukaku scored on his debut against Arsenal, bullied defenders with his power, and gave fans visions of Didier Drogba reborn. But football, like life, loves irony. Within months, his form dipped. Tuchel's system didn't quite suit him, and then came that interview. In a December sit-down with Italian media, Lukaku openly expressed doubts about his Chelsea role and spoke fondly of Inter. It was like inviting fans to a dinner party and then admitting you'd rather be somewhere else. The fallout was immediate. Tuchel benched him, supporters felt betrayed, and the reunion that was supposed to be perfect became painfully awkward. Despite the drama, Tuchel kept Chelsea competitive. The Blues lifted the UEFA Super Cup and, in early 2022, traveled to Abu Dhabi to contest the FIFA Club World Cup, the one major trophy missing from the cabinet. They won it, finally completing the set of every major club honor. For Chelsea fans, it was a moment of quiet satisfaction. No one could say their club hadn't conquered the world. But beneath the silverware, cracks began to show. Injuries mounted, results grew patchy, and Tuchel's relationship with some players frayed. Yet even then, Chelsea remained one of Europe's most feared sides until something far bigger than football hit. In February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Suddenly, Chelsea's owner, Roman Abramovich, found himself in the crosshairs of UK government sanctions due to his alleged ties to the Kremlin. The impact on the club was immediate and surreal. Chelsea, one of the richest and most powerful clubs in the world, suddenly couldn't sell tickets, couldn't buy or sell players, and couldn't even sell merchandise. The club shop was shuttered. Away fans couldn't be provided buses. Staff faced uncertainty about pay. For supporters, it felt like watching their beloved team walk a tightrope over a canyon. Abramovich, after 19 years of ownership, announced he would sell the club. It was the end of an era, one that had delivered 5 Premier League titles, 2 Champions Leagues, and countless memories. For fans, it was bittersweet. Gratitude for the success, but also fear of the unknown. After a tense bidding process, a new consortium led by American businessman Todd Bailey and investment firm Clear Lake Capital took control in May 2022. The deal was worth billions, and it marked the beginning of a new chapter. Bailey came in with bold ideas. He wanted to modernize Chelsea, expand commercial opportunities, and most famously, spend big, really big. The summer of 2022 became a shopping spree unlike anything the Premier League had ever seen. Raheem Sterling, Kalidou Koulibaly, Marc Cucurella, Wesley Fofana. The list went on and on. By January 2023, the spending spree hit astronomical levels with record-breaking deals for Enzo Fernandez and Mikhailo Mudryk. In one season, Chelsea spent more than some countries' GDPs. It was thrilling, but also chaotic. Imagine throwing every ingredient you can find into a pot and hoping it turns into a Michelin-star dish. Instead, Chelsea's squad looked bloated, unbalanced, and confused. This was Chelsea, though. So, of course, the managerial carousel continued. Tuchel, despite his success and popularity, clashed with the new ownership. In September 2022, just weeks into the season, he was abruptly sacked. The shock was enormous. His replacement was Graham Potter, the thoughtful, soft-spoken coach who had impressed at Brighton with his tactical ingenuity. But managing Brighton and managing Chelsea are two very different beasts. Potter found himself juggling an overstuffed squad, constant scrutiny, and the weight of expectation. Results nosedived. The team looked lost. And by April 2023, Potter too was gone. For a brief spell, club legend Frank Lampard returned as caretaker, giving fans déjà vu and a sense of poetic, if slightly tragic, repetition. But results remained poor, and the season spiraled into one of the worst in modern Chelsea history. Despite spending nearly £600 million in 1 year, Chelsea finished mid-table, out of Europe, and facing questions about what exactly the plan was. When the dust settled from Chelsea's disastrous 2022-23 season, the club found itself at a low point it hadn't seen in decades. For a generation of fans who had grown up on trophies, parades, and nights under the lights at Stamford Bridge, the reality of finishing mid-table was jarring. For Chelsea, mediocrity wasn't normal. It was unthinkable. The message from the ownership was clear. The Bailey Clear Lake Consortium wasn't about to accept failure. But throwing money at the problem hadn't worked. What Chelsea needed now was stability, a project, a long-term plan. Enter Mauricio Pochettino. Before Pochettino could even get to work, the squad needed surgery. The Chelsea of 2022-23 looked like a warehouse after a Black Friday sale, cluttered, messy, and full of things no one really needed. So, the summer of 2023 became a purge. Long-serving veterans left. Cesar Azpilicueta, the captain and one of the last links to the old guard, departed after 11 years of loyal service. Mason Mount, the Academy golden boy and fan favorite, was sold to Manchester United, a transfer that stung supporters deeply. Other big names like Kai Havertz, Christian Pulisic, and Mateo Kovacic also moved on. The squad, once bloated, was trimmed down. What remained was strikingly young. By August 2023, Chelsea had one of the youngest squads in the Premier League. It was risky. Relying on youth often means inconsistency, but it also meant potential. The idea was clear. Build for the long term, even if it meant short-term pain. Before Pochettino could even get to work, the squad needed surgery. The Chelsea of 2022-23 looked like a warehouse after a Black Friday sale, cluttered, messy, and full of things no one really needed. So, the summer of 2023 became a purge. Long-serving veterans left. Cesar Azpilicueta, the captain and one of the last links to the old guard, departed after 11 years of loyal service. Mason Mount, the Academy golden boy and fan favorite, was sold to Manchester United, a transfer that stung supporters deeply. Other big names like Kai Havertz, Christian Pulisic, and Mateo Kovacic also moved on. The squad, once bloated, was trimmed down. What remained was strikingly young. By August 2023, Chelsea had one of the youngest squads in the Premier League. It was risky. Relying on youth often means inconsistency, but it also meant potential. The idea was clear. Build for the long term, even if it meant short-term pain. And there was pain. Plenty of it. The first half of the 2023-24 season was rocky, to put it kindly. Injuries piled up, a recurring theme in Chelsea's recent history. Reece James, the captain and one of the team's brightest stars, spent more time on the treatment table than the pitch. Christopher Nkunku, the marquee signing from RB Leipzig, was injured before he could even make his Premier League debut. Without key players, results wobbled. Defeats piled up against mid-table teams. Stamford Bridge, once a fortress, became a place where opponents felt they could steal points. For fans, the frustration was palpable. Another season of failure loomed. But beneath the surface, something was changing. Chelsea were inconsistent, yes, but they weren't lifeless. The energy was different. Young players like Cole Palmer, Conor Gallagher, and Levi Colwill began to step into the spotlight. There were glimpses of the Pochettino philosophy, pressing with intensity, attacking with pace, and defending as a unit. For the first time in a while, Chelsea looked like they had a direction, even if the results didn't always show it. Every new era needs a talisman, and Chelsea's came in the unlikeliest of forms. Cole Palmer. Signed from Manchester City on deadline day in September 2023, Palmer wasn't a household name. City fans knew him as a promising youngster, but few outside the Etihad expected him to light up Stamford Bridge. Yet within weeks, Palmer became Chelsea's brightest spark. Elegant on the ball, fearless in tight spaces, and ice cold from the penalty spot, Palmer gave Chelsea the cutting edge they had been missing. While the rest of the team struggled for consistency, Palmer delivered goals, assists, and moments of magic. Fans began to sing his name, and suddenly a new hero had emerged. Palmer's rise symbolized something bigger. Chelsea's shift toward trusting young, hungry players rather than relying solely on big-name signings. It wasn't perfect, but it felt fresh. If the Premier League was frustrating, the domestic cups offered respite. In the 2023-24 League Cup, Chelsea fought their way to Wembley. Along the way, they produced gritty performances that reminded fans of the old Chelsea spirit: resilience, fight, and a refusal to quit. The final, against Liverpool, was a thriller. Though Chelsea ultimately fell short, the run gave supporters something to cling to, the sense that the club was still capable of competing on the big stage. It wasn't silverware, but it was a spark. By May 2024, Chelsea hadn't roared back into the top four, nor had they lifted a trophy. They finished mid-table again, but higher than the season before. More importantly, the squad had an identity. Pochettino had laid foundations. There were reasons for optimism: Palmer's breakout, Nkunku's long-awaited debut, and the growth of academy talents. But there were also big questions. Could Chelsea turn potential into consistency? Could Pochettino survive the brutal cycle of Stamford Bridge managers? Would the ownership show patience? For once, Chelsea entered the summer not as a finished product, but as a work in progress. And then came 2024-25 2025, the season where everything would begin to change. By June 2024, Chelsea pressed the reset button again. Out went Mauricio Pochettino. In came Enzo Maresca, fresh from guiding Leicester City back to the Premier League. His style? Patient, tactical, calm. A balm after years of turbulence. And surprisingly, it clicked. Under Maresca, Chelsea started to resemble a team again. They lifted the UEFA Conference League in May 2025, their first European title since the Europa League in 2019. Not the Champions League, no, but a step forward, a steady hand on the tiller. Then came the biggest test of all, the expanded Club World Cup held in the United States. Unlike past editions, this was no minor tournament. 32 teams, the best of every continent, real stakes, real drama. Chelsea faced Benfica in the first knockout clash, a stubborn opponent with pedigree. After extra time, the Blues surged ahead, winning 4-1, a scoreline that looked comfortable on paper, but in reality, it was nail-biting until the floodgates opened late. Next came Palmeiras, Brazilian passion versus English grit. Chelsea scraped through 2-1, every tackle a duel, every pass a test. The semifinal saw them line up against Fluminense, another South American powerhouse. This time, Chelsea kept their cool, sealing a 2-0 win. And then, the grand final. Paris Saint-Germain, star-studded, oil-funded, and champions of Europe. On the world stage, it was PSG versus Chelsea. The match began with PSG pressure, but Chelsea absorbed it. Then, like lightning, Cole Palmer struck. Not once, but twice. A rising star writing his name into Chelsea's history. The final whistle confirmed it. Chelsea 3, PSG 0. Champions of the world again. This time in the tournament's expanded, prestigious form. When the trophy was lifted, it wasn't just about winning. It was about redemption. After years of chaos, sackings, and spending sprees, Chelsea had found balance again. Under Maresca, they were disciplined, grounded, and quietly confident. The Club World Cup was more than silverware. It was a symbol, proof that the club wasn't just buying shiny toys, but building something lasting. For Chelsea fans, it was a reminder of what they'd always known. The Blues may stumble, but they never stay down for long. And so, as the confetti settled and the cameras cut away, the story of Chelsea rolled on. From a patch of land in West London in 1905 to kings of Europe in 2012 and 2021, and now world champions once again in 2025. The fairy tale continues in blue.